The VIP lounge of the Royal Genetics Center smelled of expensive lilies and sterile cold death. Elena stood in the dead center of the room. She wore a thin grey hospital gown that felt like sandpaper against her raw skin. Her wrists were dark with bruises. These were the marks of 10 years of bone marrow extractions. Every drop of her life had been sucked out to fuel this family. Across from her, Claire sat on a velvet throne. She looked perfect. She wore a $2 million diamond necklace that sparkled under the harsh LED lights. To the world, Claire was the miracle heir. To Elena, Claire was a parasite. "Sign the paper, Elena," Claire hissed. Her voice was sharp, like a razor blade cutting through silk. She tossed a heavy document onto the cold marble floor. It was a life support termination form. "You are empty now. Your marrow is thin. Your blood is weak. You are a biological battery that has finally run dry." The surrounding relatives laughed. These were people Elena had saved. She had paid for Uncle Henry's liver transplant. She had paid for Aunt Beatrice's designer face. They stood there in their Gucci suits and Hermes scarves, looking at Elena as if she were a pile of trash in a 5-star hotel. "Don't be dramatic, Elena," Aunt Beatrice sneered. She adjusted her gold-rimmed glasses. "It is your duty to die for this family. You should be grateful we let you live in this clinic for so long." Claire stood up. Her movements were slow and predatory. She walked toward Elena. Each click of her 4-inch designer heels sounded like a hammer hitting a nail. Claire stopped inches away. She looked down at Elena's bare, trembling feet. Suddenly Claire brought her heel down hard. She ground the sharp metal tip into Elena's toes. Elena didn't scream. She had no breath left for screaming. The physical pain was a white flash in her eyes, but the humiliation was deeper. "Look at you," Claire whispered. She leaned in. Elena could smell Claire's expensive French perfume. It smelled of roses and betrayal. "You have no name, you have no money, you have no blood left to give. You are a ghost, Elena, and ghosts don't need life support." Elena looked up. Her eyes were hollow but burning. "Everything you have," Elena whispered. Her voice was a dry rasp. "Every diamond, every organ in your bodies. It all belongs to me. I am the source." "You were the source," Claire corrected. She laughed, a high tinkling sound that filled the room. "But the legal team finished the transfer this morning. I am the heir now. You are just a medical waste product." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors drifted open. A scent of cold rain and dark, expensive sandalwood flooded the sterile room. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The air became heavy. Silas entered. He was a mountain of dark power. He wore a midnight blue suit that cost more than the hospital wing. His eyes were pieces of frozen obsidian. Behind him stood 8 men in tactical gear. They moved like silent shadows. Silas did not look at the relatives. He did not look at the diamonds. He looked only at the girl in the grey gown. He walked straight to Elena. He ignored Claire as if she were a piece of furniture. Silas reached out. His large, warm hand cupped Elena's neck. His skin was burning hot against her icy, bruised skin. The touch was aggressive. It was possessive. Sensory touch and scent triggered. "You kept me waiting, little bird," Silas said. His voice was a low growl that vibrated in Elena's chest. He took off his heavy cashmere overcoat. The fabric was soft and smelled of winter and wealth. He draped it over Elena's thin shoulders. It felt like 10 pounds of warm armor. "Who the hell are you?" Claire shrieked. Her face was twisted with rage. "Security! Remove this man!" Silas finally turned his head. He looked at Claire for exactly 1 second. "Security is busy, Claire. They are currently being fired." Elena reached into the pocket of the cashmere coat. She felt something cold and metallic. She pulled out a small, black electronic device. It was the biometric authorization revocation. "The battery isn't empty, Claire," Elena said. She looked at her sister. "I just decided to turn off the lights." Elena pressed her thumb against the scanner. Beep! A red light flashed. Every screen in the VIP lounge turned blood red. "Authorization revoked," a mechanical voice announced. "Trust fund access terminated. Medical insurance cancelled. Biometric identity locked." Claire clutched her chest. The small green light on her heart monitor flashed yellow. Then it turned a violent, blinking red. A high-pitched, rhythmic chirp filled the silent room. This was the sound of her life expiring in real time. She reached out, her fingers clawing at the air. "You can't do this," Aunt Beatrice screamed. She didn't look at her dying daughter. She looked at her own phone. "My platinum card just declined. My balance is 0. Elena, you bitch, turn it back on right now." Beatrice rushed toward Elena. Her hand was raised, her sharp nails aiming for Elena's eyes. She wanted to tear the skin off the girl who had stopped the money, but she never reached her. Silas moved. He didn't even look at Beatrice. He simply stepped between them like a wall of solid granite. He caught Beatrice's wrist in midair. The sound of her heavy gold bracelets clashing was sharp and violent, like a death knell. Silas squeezed. The bone made a faint, sickening creak. Beatrice cried out and fell to her knees. Status flip 1. The parasites are physically crushed. Silas turned back to Elena. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough, calloused, and surprisingly gentle. The scent of his leather gloves, rich, dark, and masculine, filled her senses. It was the smell of a man who owned the world. Sensory scent and touch triggered. "You've been a ghost for too long, little bird," Silas whispered. His breath was hot against her cold ear. "Watch how they eat each other for $1." The room shifted. The cousins and aunts who had been laughing a moment ago now looked at Claire with predatory eyes. They weren't family anymore. They were starving wolves. "If Claire is a fraud," a cousin whispered, "then our trust shares are worthless." "She lied to us," Aunt Beatrice shouted, holding her bruised wrist. She looked at Claire with pure hatred. "She told us the DNA match was perfect. She forced us to sign those medical bills. Elena is the victim here. We were all tricked by this intruder." The first slice of the salami was gone. Claire was now completely alone. She was gasping for air, her expensive makeup running down her face in black streaks. She looked like a melting wax doll. "Wait," Claire wheezed. She fell to her knees at Elena's feet. She tried to grab the hem of Silas's coat. "Elena, sister, please. I'm sick. I need the power for the heart. You can't just kill me in public." "I'm not killing you," Elena said. She looked down. Her voice was cold and beautiful, like a winter morning. "I'm just stopping the charity. You want to live? Earn it, like I earned every drop of blood you took from me." Silas snapped his fingers. 2 men in black uniforms stepped forward. They weren't doctors. They were repo agents. They carried heavy, professional metallic cases. Status flip 2. The physical stripping begins. "The jewelry," Silas commanded. One agent grabbed Claire's wrist. He didn't use a key. He used a heavy industrial bolt cutter. Snap. The $2 million diamond bracelet fell to the floor. It made a dull, heavy thud on the marble. It looked like common glass trash. "The earrings," Silas continued. Claire shrieked as they were unceremoniously pulled from her ears. Her lobes were red and torn. She looked small. She looked ugly. She was no longer a socialite. She was a biological error, being erased. "The dress is a custom piece from the 2025 winter collection," Silas noted. His eyes scanned Claire's trembling form with clinical disgust. "Registered to Elena's private account. It is a stolen asset. Remove it. Here. Now," Claire shrieked, trying to cover her body with her thin, shaking arms. "You didn't care about Elena's dignity when you made her bleed in a hospital basement for 10 years. Silas's voice was a low growl. "Why should I care about yours? You are wearing stolen skin. Give it back." The guards produced specialized fabric shears. With 3 swift movements, the designer silk was sliced open. It fell to the floor in wet, heavy pieces. Claire was left standing in her thin, cheap shapewear. The elite members of the ethics committee turned their heads away. They weren't sad for her. They were embarrassed to even look at her. Claire was no longer a person of status. She was a debt that was being settled. "My heart." Claire's voice was a thin wheeze. The chirp was now a steady, ominous beep. "Your heart is at 5% power," Dr. Aris informed her coldly. He didn't look up from his tablet. "But don't worry. The Thorn repo firm has provided a replacement. A standard government-issue mechanical pump. It is made of plastic. It has no luxury settings. It will keep you alive, just barely." "No," Claire cried out. "It was never your heart," Elena said. She took a step toward her sister. She stood tall in the warmth of Silas's shadow. "It was my gift, and today I am taking it back." Claire lay on the cold marble, shivering in her thin, wet rags. But suddenly, a hysterical, jagged laugh broke from her lips. She looked at her mother. Beatrice. Beatrice had stopped backing away. She had found a new weapon on her glowing digital tablet. "You think you won, Elena?" Beatrice sneered. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and full of a new, sick hope. "Look at the fine print of the Vane Family Trust. Section 8, Clause 4, the co-liability agreement." Beatrice held the screen up. The text was highlighted in a violent, burning red. "Your father did not just gamble away the money, Elena." Beatrice cackled. "He borrowed $50 million from the darkest lenders in the city, and he used your biological identity, your very bone marrow, as the primary collateral. If you reclaim the heir status, you reclaim the debt. You aren't inheriting a fortune, you are inheriting a death sentence." The room went silent. The air felt heavy, like it was made of lead. The cousins, who had been cowering a moment ago, suddenly straightened their expensive ties. They looked at Elena like vultures circling a dying animal. The wound, Elena's ultimate despair. "50 million?" a cousin whispered, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "That means every cent you just revoked from us is already gone. It belongs to the collectors now." "She's a liability," another aunt shouted. "She's not a queen. She's a walking debt trap. Guards, arrest her for fraud. She's leading this family into bankruptcy." Elena felt the world tilt. The weight of her father's sins felt like a physical mountain crushing her chest. She had survived the needles. She had survived the bone marrow extractions. But she could not survive this. $50 million. It was a number designed to bury her forever. She felt her knees go weak. She started to sink toward the floor. But she never hit the ground. Silas's arm was around her waist instantly. It was like a band of heated iron. He pulled her flush against his side. His large hands splayed across her ribs. The heat from his body burned through the thin grey gown, anchoring her to the earth. The scent of his expensive sandalwood cologne, rich, deep and authoritative, cleared the fog in her brain. The cure, the alpha's aggressive protection. "Stand up, little bird," Silas growled. His voice was a low vibration in her ear. "I don't allow my things to touch the floor." Silas turned his gaze toward the relatives. It was the look of a god watching ants. He pulled a heavy, matte black device from his pocket. He didn't look at it. He looked only at Beatrice. "The debt collectors?" Silas asked. His voice was dangerously calm. "You mean the ones who were waiting in the lobby? I just bought their contract. For $60 million. I paid the extra 10 just to see their faces when I told them I was the new owner." Beatrice's jaw dropped. The tablet slipped from her shaking hands and shattered on the floor. "But that's not enough," Silas continued. He looked at the guards. "Bring me the collection tray." One of the tactical guards stepped forward. He held a silver tray used for surgical instruments. "All of you," Silas commanded, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "Every cousin, every aunt, put your black cards, your gold cards, and your titanium jewelry on this tray. Now, you can't do this," Uncle Henry blustered, clutching his wallet. "This is private property." Silas snapped his fingers. A guard moved like lightning. He grabbed Henry's arm and twisted it behind his back. The wallet was ripped away. The guard pulled out a sleek black American Express card. Silas took the card. He looked Henry in the eye. Then he placed the card between his fingers and snapped it. The sound of the high-grade plastic shattering was like a bone breaking. One by one, Silas took the cards from the tray. Status flip. Physical destruction of their status. Snap. "That was your summer in Ibiza," Silas said, dropping the pieces of a gold card into the trash. Snap. "That was your penthouse in New York," he said, breaking a titanium card with his bare hands. The metal screeched as it bent and cracked. "You are not just poor now." Silas stepped toward the relatives. "You are unbanked. I have flagged every single one of your social security numbers. No bank on this planet will give you a line of credit. You couldn't even lease a bicycle." Beatrice was hyperventilating. She looked at the pieces of her life scattered on the silver tray like cheap confetti. "Wait." Claire gasped from the floor, her voice a thin, pathetic wheeze. "The $50 million. If you bought the debt, then Elena owes you." "She does," Silas said. He looked down at Elena. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second before turning back to ice. "And I am a very demanding lender. I think I'll start by taking her away from this circus." Silas turned to Dr. Aris. "Finalize it. I want them erased before I reach the car." Dr. Aris nodded. He pressed a heavy, glowing electronic seal onto the central console. A deep metallic clack echoed through the building. It sounded like a guillotine falling in a city square. System update. All Vane sub-accounts permanently terminated, the mechanical voice announced. Status non-existent. My identity, Beatrice whispered, staring at her phone. The screen was blank. No name, no records, no life. You are not the Vanes anymore, Elena said. She stood tall now, wrapped in Silas's heavy cashmere. You are just people who lived on my blood, and now, the blood has stopped flowing. Claire's scream was a thin, jagged glass shard in the freezing air of the lounge. You cannot touch me. This is assault. Someone call the police. It is not assault, Claire, Silas said. He adjusted his heavy silver cufflinks with a slow, deliberate motion. The metallic click was loud in the sudden, terrified silence of the room. It is a lien. Your jaw, your nose, your porcelain teeth. They are all listed as leased assets. Under the Thorn Repo firm, you are currently in possession of stolen goods. He looked at the repo team. He did not look at Claire's face. He looked at her like a broken machine. Prepare the mobile surgical unit. We will take back the biological implants now. Or, she can sign the permanent exile agreement and leave this country in the next hour agreement, and leave this country in the next hour agreement, and leave this country in the next hour. Claire looked at the cold, steel medical cases. She looked at the sharp, gleaming tools inside. She looked at Silas's eyes. There was no mercy there. There was only the cold, hard logic of a debt collector. She realized then that Silas did not see her as a woman. He did not even see her as a human being. To him, she was just a collection of bad debts and stolen parts. Elena stepped forward. She leaned in close to Claire. The scent of Elena's hospital soap was clean and sharp. It mingled with the heavy sandalwood of Silas's presence. Elena felt the heat of Silas's body behind her, a wall of pure power protecting her back. You always told me I was just a battery, Claire, Elena whispered. Her voice was like silk stretched over a razor blade. But you forgot one thing. A battery provides the power. Without me, your world is dark. Without me, you are just a collection of cheap plastic parts. Elena pulled a final heavy document from Silas's leather folder. The Vane name. I have bought the trademark. As of this second, no one in this room is a Vane. You are all unassigned. You have no history. You have no legacy. You have no legacy. You have nothing but the breath in your lungs. And even that is a gift from me. Beatrice let out a strangled cry. The pride of their noble name was gone. They were nobodies in a city that only respected power. Silas reached down and grabbed Elena's hand. His grip was firm and possessive. He pulled her against his side, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. The heat of his skin was like a drug. Elena felt the last of her ghost self vanish. She was solid. She was powerful. She was his. The rain is starting, Silas said. He looked at the large floor-to-ceiling windows. It is time for the trash to be taken out. The security guards stepped forward. They did not use handcuffs. They simply grabbed Claire and Beatrice by their arms. Wait, my shoes. Let me get my shoes, Claire wailed. Her bare feet slapped against the cold marble floor. She was dragged toward the exit like a common criminal. The heavy glass doors slid open. A gust of freezing wind and grey rain swept into the hall. The guards did not stop. They marched the women out onto the wet black pavement. Claire stood there in her thin paper gown. The rain instantly soaked through the material. It made the gown transparent and pathetic. She looked back at the glowing warmth of the genetic center. She saw the elite and the wealthy. They were all looking at her, but they did not see Claire. They looked through her as if she were made of glass. She had been erased from their world. The doors closed. The sound of the rain was cut off. Silence returned to the hall. Elena turned to Silas. The tension between them was a physical spark. What now? Silas did not answer with words. He reached out and caught her chin. He tilted her face up to his. His eyes were dark and hungry. The shadow of his large frame completely swallowed her. Now, Silas growled. His voice vibrated deep in his chest. We go home. I have $1 billion empire that needs a queen, and I have a debt of my own to pay you. What debt? Elena breathed. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. The debt of 10 years of loneliness. Silas whispered. He didn't wait for her to respond. He swept her up into his arms. Elena wrapped her arms around his neck. She buried her face in the crook of his shoulder. The scent of his power was all she could breathe. Behind them, The room full of powerful elites bowed their heads. They did not look at Elena. They looked at the floor. They knew that from this day forward, Elena was untouchable. She wasn't just an heir. She was the woman in Silas Thorne's shadow, and that shadow reached across the entire world. The black SUV waited at the curb. Silas stepped into the rain, but not a single drop touched Elena. He shielded her with his own body. He was a wall of muscle and expensive wool. He placed her inside the car as if she were the most precious diamond in his collection. As the car pulled away, Elena looked out the tinted window. She saw Claire. The girl was huddled under a bus stop sign. She was shivering. She was unrecognizable. She was a ghost. Elena leaned back into the soft leather of the seat. Silas's hand found hers in the dark. "Everything you see," Silas said. His voice was a low promise, "is yours."
Watching Claire stand in that soaked paper gown while her synthetic heart beeped insufficient funds was the ultimate social autopsy. I have to wonder if you found out your entire family's luxury lifestyle was literally bleeding you dry for a decade. Would you have settled for just revoking their status, or would you have demanded every single drop back? I actually spent ages debating whether Silas should let her keep her designer nose, but I decided that a total asset reclamation just felt more honest to his character.